Alright guys, I know it's been a couple weeks since I've gotten a video posted. I've had a lot going on lately. My son and I have been under the weather for a few days. I'm getting ready to start my new job tomorrow. My mother-in-law has been admitted to the hospital. So I just have had a lot going on. So, let's dive in and get things started. In this video, I'm talking about lists. If you're new to 40K, welcome. I hope you find this vlog as well as my others very helpful and informative. I hope as well, if you've been listening to other vlogs, if you've been watching battle reports, reading material online, I hope you find it all helpful in furthering your journey into 40K. Now, lists are important because we want to stay organized. We want to know what we're running, what upgrades we've given our models, and let's face it, we don't have the world's greatest memory. That's why there are programs out there like Battlescribe that you can get free online. There's Army Builder, or just the good old-fashioned pen and paper. One advice I was given when I started was have 4 lists ready to go. 500 points, 1,000 points, 1,500 points, and 2,000 points. Which makes sense. Though I could never make a list at 500 points very easy. I always find it easier doing 1,000 points and higher. But I think there's more that we need to look at when it comes to building a list. And we're going to start by looking at 4 known factors and some that you may not have thought about before. The 4 known factors that we first have to answer is: what points are we playing? What's the army that you're running? What's the army you're going up against? And the 4th factor, which we'll touch on a little bit later, is the battlefield. Now, the first factor that we have to figure out is what is the points level of the game. And again, to use examples, let's say 1,500 points. What army are you running? In this example, I'm going to use Imperial Guard. And what are you going up against? For this example, we're going to go with Space Marines. Now, that particular question can get a little bit tricky because, one, you may know what your opponent is playing, either by talking to them at your gaming club, game store, wherever you play. You may, or through social media, Facebook, Instagram, or however you communicate on social media. So you may know through that. Your opponent may even give you the option of, okay, what army do you want to go up against? Or you may not know till your opponent gets there. And you'll figure out at the last minute. So, you got room to tweak. But let's continue on. So we know the first factor, 1,500 points. We know the second factor. You're playing Imperial Guard. We know the third factor. You're facing Space Marines. The fourth factor is, what is the battlefield? I'll touch on that one in a little bit, or maybe in another video. But that can be an important component too. So, just let's put that on the back burner. Now, I think now we have to go into some sub-factors. At least I look at some sub-factors when building a list. So the first sub-factor, because we already know points, that's not going to change. So 1,500 flat. First sub-factor is, what with my army, what's the strengths and weaknesses in my collection as of right now? The second sub-factor is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the army that my opponent is facing? So, right now, and since I'm using Imperial Guard, I just recently built a list, 1,500 points, that's a good start. What I have currently, the strength is, I've got good armor, and I've got a massive amount of troops. What am I lacking? What am my weakness? I don't have much for fast attack. I hardly have any fast attack. I have nothing for elite, and I have no real support, and I'm doing air quotes. When I say support, I'm talking specifically like Basilisks, Hydras. I don't have air support, and I don't have anti-air, which is going to hurt, which will hurt. When I look at my opponent, what are their strengths and weaknesses? Strengths, they have units that have 3-up armor, 2-up armor. They have units that have invuln saves. They've got air support. They have anti-air support, which the anti-air doesn't really matter in this particular game because I have no air support anyway. But I don't have anti-air. So they've got air. They would have air superiority. They have the ability to deep strike with drop pods, with terminators. And they've got enough weaponry that they can actually throw a lot of dice at my army. And they've got weaponry that also, that's AP2, AP3, AP4, that really can hurt. So, we gotta keep those strengths and weaknesses in mind. Now, when we're going to build this list, we're trying to anticipate what he's possibly going to bring. Now, here's one important tip. When you build your list, if possible, now I know you'll probably get a chance to maybe make some tweaks when he gets there and you get to see what he's bringing, what your opponent is bringing to the table. But try and leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room so if you have to, you can make some small, minor adjustments, maybe without making model counts. Maybe you're making different upgrades, or maybe instead of bringing that Demolisher Leman Russ, maybe you want to bring a Vanquisher Leman Russ, or Punisher Leman Russ. Something like that. Or if you actually see that your opponent is bringing something you had not really anticipated, like maybe he's got... Oh, I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe he's got some scouts. Didn't really think he'd bring scouts. Or if he's got a couple of land raiders on the table, then maybe you'll get a chance that maybe I need to take this unit out to insert this to deal with that new threat. So we got all that figured out. Now let's build a list. With building a list, it depends on how you're going to, on how it's built. Now, if you're using combined arms detachment or a CAD, it gets tricky because you generally want to fill that HQ and 2 troop slot. That's usually what I do. Is put the HQ in, put your 2 troop choices, work around that. But with some of the new codexes, Space Marines, Necrons, Space Wolves, Eldar, we're going to have Tau coming out, so they're probably going to have some formations. This goes back to my formation versus CAD video to a degree. If you run a formation, so for example a Decurion or the Gladius Strike Force for Space Marines in Decurion's Necrons, you already have pre-filled slots. So you already have dictated what's already going to start in your army. So you can go in and change some things, like how many's in a particular squad, what gear they're using, what upgrades they have, and then you can kind of fill out the rest of your points from there. Or in a case as such, Space Marines, the new Space Marines Codex, the Necron Codex, you bring that primary force, Gladius Strike Force, Decurion Detachment, and then you bring, depending on points level, you can bring in 1, maybe 2, depending on what the points costs are, auxiliary formation. So you have one main formation, and then you have a little smaller sub-formation. So you already have some things predetermined. And in some formations, you can kind of play around with them. And hopefully when I get started on my Codex reviews, which I hope to start soon, I can kind of get into that a little bit more. But since we're playing Imperial Guard, we have to use a CAD. So, okay. HQ, 2 troop choices. So for the 2 troop choices, we're going to do 2 infantry platoons. Each platoon is going to have 3 infantry squads. So we're talking 30 guardsmen per platoon. If you run 2 of them, you've got 60. That is a lot of models on the table. And that's not including your company commands. Then you have your platoon command. So there's another 15 models. Well, the company command would actually be the HQ. Then you can throw in a couple of units that don't take up 4 sword slots, so like Commissar, Primaris Psyker, so you get that psychic phase. Now what do you do? 1,500 points. What I've got for a 1,500 point list for guard is I've got the 2 infantry platoons, 30 each, and each infantry squad has a Voxcaster and a grenade launcher. Now, the 2 company infantry commands are a little different. I think one has 2 grenade launchers. They have Voxcasters. Anything that has that is related to infantry will have a Voxcaster. And the grenade launchers, I've already told you about. The command squads, I think each have a flamer, and then either 2 plasmas, 2 meltas, 2 grenade launchers, something like that. I've got 1 armored sentinel for fast attack, and then I've got 3 Leman Russes as my heavy support, and I'm running them as individual. I'm not running a squad, but 3 individual Leman Russes, 2 regular Leman Russes, battle cannon, hull-mounted lance cannons, and then heavy bolter side sponsons. Then I've got, I believe it's the Eradicator. It's the plasma cannon. So I've got the plasma cannon. I believe I got a heavy bolter sponson, or hull mount, and then plasma side sponsons. Could do multi-meltas. For sake of argument, I did flamers, and I think that just barely took me over 1,500. Now your opponent could bring, let's just, for example, let's make a CAD. So your HQ will do a captain, and we're gonna alter his stats a little bit, or his gear. We're going to give him a lightning claw. We're going to give him a combi weapon. So he's going to run about 130 right there. We're going to have 3 5-man infantry squads. One's going to have plasma. One's going to have a multi-melta. Actually, I think 2 have plasma. One's going to have a multi-melta. We're going to run a Dreadnought, who's going to have Power Fist Stormbolter, glass cannon. We're going to have 2 Storm Talons, the Assault Cannon, and both are going to run the Skyhammer missile launcher. And I'm not even thinking to tally these points up. Probably could bring a shooting Terminator, throw in assault cannon. Probably do, they all have power fists. So, like I said, I'm not really tallying up the Space Marines, but you're looking at, okay, he's got flyers, which is going to hurt. He's got a good amount of armor versus troops. He's got weapons that will be able to hurt me when he gets into range. Now, if you do 10-man squads for Space Marines, you could throw in heavy bolters, because heavy bolters, you're going to be hitting them on 2s, I believe. So that's going to really whittle down guard. So that's how you build examples of how you can build lists. Now, I mentioned Battlefield earlier, because the battlefield can also play a factor as well. I factor that because it depends on what the board looks like, how the terrain is set up, whether you have overload of terrain. Maybe you're wanting to do an urban setting, heavy urban setting. Maybe you have a good amount. It's not too much, but it's not too little. Maybe you've got a little bit of terrain on one side and you have a little bit of an opening, or maybe you're doing a narrative play where you're meeting your opponent face to face in an open field. There's nothing wrong with that. So there you can kind of tweak a few things if need be to kind of play to your advantage. Also, another thing to keep in mind with your lists. And while you're not going to be able to do anything about it, keep in mind potential mission types. So, if you're doing narrative play, you're playing Maelstrom missions. If you don't have anti-air, if you don't have Hydras or Hunters, Stalkers, whatever, if you don't have the anti-air, don't worry too... I'm not going to say don't worry, but I'm not going to say don't be... don't... What's the word I'm looking for? Don't worry, but don't panic either. Because you never know, if you hold an objective, you may roll Skyfire on the objective dice. So there's your anti-air support right there. If you can get the right unit on it. Now, if we're throwing formations out, we're going strictly cat. And if you're going to play at least 1250 points or higher, if you're new, this is what I really, really want to stress. Whatever army you're playing, if there is a particular model that you love, so let's just say you are playing Space Marines, and you love Assault Terminators. One, at least make sure that your game is going to be at least 1,500 points or higher. And it can vary depending on whatever you love. This is all based on around a particular model that you love. So if you love Assault Terminators, and let's say you're going to play a 2,000 point game, throw one or two squads in. Just go ahead and plug them in there. Then go back and fill in your HQ, your troops, and then start throwing in, well, don't throw in, but go ahead and start playing. Maybe experiment with some other units and start filling in the other slots. And the reason I say go ahead and name your favorite model here first, is because if you love it that much, and you want to play it, play it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because that's one of the biggest thing about 40K is, when you pick an army to play, you're picking it because you like how the models are, you like the narrative, you like the fluff behind the army. So if there's a particular unit that you love how they look, you want them on the, see how they do on the table, you want them on the table consistently, build your list around that model. Now, I can't say that you're always going to win. You're not always going to lose. But at the same time, take some time to really work that list. Maybe play that same list 4, 5, 6 times. And then go back and analyze. Look at your victories, look at your losses. And say, okay, I won these games. Why did I win these games? What models did I consistently lose? And then in the games you lost, you look at your list and say, okay, these models were taken out first. Compare the two game type, victory versus losses, and maybe make some tweaks. Maybe you look at it after having, let's say, 4 losses in a row, and you think, okay, maybe having 2 Assault Terminator squads isn't really working. Maybe drop down to 1. Try that out for a couple of games. Or maybe deep striking them isn't, is being harmful. It's not working out for you. Throw them in a Land Raider. Get them up the battlefield as quickly as possible. So there are my thoughts on building lists. As always, if you enjoy this video, or if you've enjoyed my other videos, and you want to get to see more, please subscribe. If you have any questions, if you have comments, if there's anything you want me to touch on, to get my opinions, my thoughts on, please leave comments below, and I will try and get to them as quickly as possible. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.